Berserk is a Japanese fantasy manga created by author Kentaro Miura. Originally, a prototype was released in 1988, but the manga itself debuted just 2 years after. The franchise, of course, didn't come to America until 2003, and honestly, there aren't a lot of franchises I love as much as Berserk. Fair trigger warning to those who can't take it, Berserk depicts several messed up things, such as rape, death, suicide, and some minor cases of abuse and alcohol. Also, this video series will contain a lot of spoilers for the series, since I intend for this to be a fun little analysis. I may start more series just like this one, but that's only going to be for franchises that I'm heavily passionate about. So let's start at the very beginning with Volume 1. Page 1 depicts our main lead having sex with a prostitute who starts to turn into a demonic-looking beast. Afterwards, of course, our main lead very aggressively fires a cannonball from his mechanical arm directly into her face, and then walks off into the night, leaving the corpse behind him. Now, a lot of people criticize Berserk's opening scene because it's very inconsistent. Partially because this is something the Black Swordsman would never do, which is because Kentaro Miura made up the story as he went along, meaning that most of the traumatic shit in his past was not in his head yet. What I will say is that this opening scene is very easy to grab your attention. I mean, you got fucking titties, cannon arm, a badass dude. It shows a large amount of raunchiness to kind of immediately throw you directly into its world, basically giving you an immediate warning that if you can't handle this, there's much worse to come. Plus, it gives you a pretty engaging outlook, and criticizing it for being too edgy I feel is unfair, since Berserk as a whole is supposed to be dark and brooding, and this opening scene is definitely not the worst thing that is in Berserk. While I do think that this is extremely off for the Black Swordsman to do, I'm happy that he didn't pick an opening scene so shallow or over the top. It just gives you a small taste of what Berserk really contains. Now, I will go into my problem with this further down the road, and it's the same problem that everyone else has. In any case, we're given a glimpse of the gloomy night sky, and our hero gets dressed and heads to town. On his way to town, he sees a group of children who are being taken away in a horse carriage. Meanwhile, we're given the introduction to our comic relief character, Puck, a young and small and penisless little fairy-like creature with a sense of humor and a knack for getting himself into trouble. Meanwhile, these thugs have him tied to the wall and are throwing blades at him like it's a game, and that's when our hero comes to the bar. Then, of course, after warning the bartender, he takes out a crossbow, and while this is going on, we get to see Puck be goofy and cute. Before, of course, our hero shoots one of the guys picking on the poor fairy in the head. You can also see the fairy's reaction. It's funny. Afterwards, the hero shoots a few other thugs, and then we get an image of his appearance. A tall man with dark-clad armor and a large sword on his back. He then fires another arrow into the nose of one of the thugs and does some pretty badass. He then asks if he is a robber for Coca Castle, which he speculates has a harsh ownership over this town. I just love how brutal this part is, because he slams his face into the ground when he doesn't give the right answer. This is the first impression we get of our main lead. Just a tough guy who doesn't put up with nonsense, comparable to Batman, but unlike Batman, actually willing to kill people. He then tells them to warn their boss that the Black Swordsman has come, and quickly takes out his sword, cutting another thug in half that was attempting to sneak attack him. Of course, the manga goes to the extent to say that it probably couldn't even really be called a sword, and that it's more a large hunk of iron than any kind of blade. In any case, he leaves to go take care of the Coca Castle situation. Afterwards, however, Puck follows after him and tries to thank him for saving him. I think Puck is a very nice addition to this manga, and while a lot of people may not personally agree, I feel he holds the role he was meant for pretty well. He's supposed to be a comic relief character, solely meant to make the dark and depressing presence of the franchise happier, and put a bit of a softer tune on the harsh and brooding blow the series gives you. In any case, afterwards, Puck attempts to touch the Black Swordsman, only to be flicked off and very harshly told not to touch him. This is a very important part of the Black Swordsman's personality, one that you will come to understand much later. In any case, the Black Swordsman is surrounded by soldiers, and Puck ditches him because he's an asshole. Afterwards, the Black Swordsman is being whipped repeatedly for his actions, and thus we're given the opening image for the manga, the first real image of the Black Swordsman we got to see. I love this picture because it conveys a lot of emotion for our main lead. You see him covered in scars without any of his equipment except his mechanical arm, and a distant shadow over his face and body, kind of giving this mysterious aura, implying that this is nothing compared to the shit he must have been through prior to this journey. In any case, after spitting on the person torturing him, the Lord Mayor, it's actually what this fucking manga calls him. It's hilarious. Comes in so he can ask the Black Swordsman why he did what he did, and tries to explain to him the situation he's put them in. We're also given an image of the master of the thugs, Black Swordsman, killed. A huge man in armor resembling that of a snake on top of an armor-clad horse, as well as a look of fear in the mayor's eyes. The Black Swordsman then reveals that he understands their leader is a monster who eats people, and that nobody gets what he is more than him, implying that the Black Swordsman has faced many foes similar to this one. He then calls out the mayor for feeding various townsmen to the monster at Coca Castle, to which the mayor attempts to state it's to protect the town, but the Black Swordsman doesn't buy that in the fucking slightest. This is partially what I think is one of the few aspects of his personality that I love the most. His actions can be commonly cruel or harsh, but he's very good at shutting people down in an argument, and putting your own hypocrisies into perspective before you can call them out in the slightest. In any case, the mayor gets mad and tells them to torture him as much as they want, as long as they don't kill him. Afterwards, the mayor heads to Coca Castle to apologize to the owner of said castle, the Snake Baron, and I love the formal way they presented him as a character. Earlier, we were given an interesting glimpse of him as a beast, and in this case, we only get to see vague shapes of him. We get to see his mouth, the back of his head, the shape of his formal position, even the glowing eyes, but as an introduction and as of right now, we don't get to see all of his face. This is one of the many interesting things about the scenario. It gives you this chilling aura, showing that while he does look human enough, eating his food and talking to his guests, he obviously is much more than that. Especially when it emphasizes exactly what it is that he's eating, which appears to be people. Something that the anime left completely out, might I add. In any case, the mayor attempts to apologize to him, explaining that he's willing to give more hostages as a deal. And interestingly enough, the creepy Snake Baron says something that falls eerily in line with what the Black Swordsman had said to him earlier, criticizing the mayor for giving away his townspeople as long as it meant he'd be safe. We're then finally given an unsettling image of his face for a brief moment before it reverts back to the shadows and the mayor is taken away by his men. The scene transitions to the Black Swordsman, who is being kept in a lone, desolate dungeon cell, as well as an image of a terrifying fetal-looking creature, one that is heavily implied to be part of his hallucination. This creature plays a big part of the Black Swordsman backstory, and there's a lot I have to say about him later. In any case, the Black Swordsman snaps out of it when Puck reappears to free him, and this part is really cute, partially because Puck comes to the realization that he's standing in piss. And I don't know, maybe this worked well because these images are not colored, so it's all black and white. I giggle. I feel I should point out the difference between Puck and the Black Swordsman as characters. It's obviously shown in this small little scene by this image right here. You see an angry and bitter image of the Black Swordsman, full of hatred, but in the same page we also see a sweet and gentle look from Puck. Despite his goofy nature, you can definitely tell from this expression a lot about him. In any case, Puck attempts to heal the Black Swordsman, only for the Black Swordsman to yell at him again for touching him. Once again, you'll understand why he's like this later, but I want to point out that it doesn't make any sense because yet again at the beginning of the manga, the Black Swordsman was fucking a demon. Anyway, Puck gets all erotic for some reason. This of course heals the Black Swordsman and his wounds, to which Puck explains that this is one of the many abilities that elves like him have. In any case, the Black Swordsman reveals his name to be Guts. Now whether or not it's Guts, Gats, or Gatsu is very controversial, but the common and most used name is Guts. That was the confirmation of Kentaro Miura himself. Upon inspection, Puck finds that Guts has a brand on his neck. Now this is of course another thing that will be important later, but for now I want to focus on the way Puck describes it. He says that it looks like a coat of arms. Now a coat of arms is defined as the distinctive heraldic bearing or shield of a person, family, corporation, or county. And what interests me about this is the history of how he got it in line with this description. As you all know, Guts was a former mercenary of the Band of the Hawk, which had a crest or coat of arms resembling the wings of the falcon with a sword between them. It should take notice that the brand itself looks like, at least to me, two serpents wrapping around some sort of trident. This isn't really anything huge to look at, but it is interesting to take notice of. As a whole, I never really looked at the shape or design of the brand, but I always recognized it. I'm not sure why it's shaped the way it is yet, but it is overall a very distinct shape, very much in contrast to the Band of the Hawk crest. Anyway, Guts quickly knocks Puck off his shoulder and states that it's called a brand, and half of Guts' face is cast in a bright shadow. In any case, Puck is very confused by his description of the brand, so Guts tells him that very soon this place will be ravaged and burnt to the ground, and we find out that Guts is planning to use the townsfolk as bait, to which, after Puck pointing this out, Guts shows himself to be very indifferent to the deaths of the townfolk. Guts explains that people who are too weak to defend themselves have no place in this world, so Puck asks why he saved him, and Guts laughs, calling him a little bug. This angers Puck, who smacks him in the jaw and looks at him with discontent. At this point, you can definitely look at his face and tell that Guts saving his life meant the world to him, and now that Guts has stomped on the value it held, Puck is very hurt. So of course Puck leaves and Guts uses the key to escape his prison, but not before his brand activates. For the first time, we see that the brand bleeds when any sort of monster or demon is nearby. Also, Guts licks the blood because he's metal as fuck. So Puck flies to the town looking at the awful onslaught of what's happening and the many terrible deaths of the town's citizens, to which after, we are given an image of the Snake Baron's army, as well as a disturbing and disgusting image of the Snake Baron drinking the insides of a dead child. To be perfectly honest, upon my first viewing of this, none of the images prior had really gotten to me, so when I saw this, I was mildly freaked out. I don't know if it's the lack of emphasis on his eyes, but the detail in this single image is astounding, from every curve on his armor, and the composition of shadows on his face. This image is unsettling to tamely describe it. What I think is so interesting is the level of monstrous detail given to the Snake Baron, and in that same light, Guts looks like a monster on his own as well, with that same black shadow edging on his face. No expression, no detail on his face, just a single angry eye as he lays waste to each and every member of the Snake Baron's army. The way it builds up both of them as monsters in this small little scene gives the emphasis that there's more to Guts than meets the eye. The Snake Baron recognizes him and asks him if he's the so-called Black Swordsman, then explains that Guts has no hope of defeating him due to him being a mere human. What I think might be me reading into it just a little too much, especially since this is a seinen fantasy, is that Guts is battling a creature known to be much more powerful than him. He is a beast, and because he's a beast, he looks down on humans. In this very scene, he's on a high horse. He's literally on a high horse. In any case, Guts fires crossbows at him, knocking him off his horse, and then shoots him again to finish him off. However, upon falling where he landed, he gets thrashed by a huge, scaly tail, and thrown in the air before hitting a harsh fall. Then out from the darkness emerges a hideous beast, nothing at all like the snake-clad armored man from the darkness before. He then lays waste to Guts, blow after blow, thrashing him and throwing him around as well as crushing his body underneath his large tail, leaving Guts in a pool of his own blood before picking him up, preparing to eat him, only for Guts to smile as he showcases his mechanical arm to be a cannon and fires an explosive blast into the beast's face. This knocks him back, causing him to grab his sword and cut the beast in half. This image right here is amazing. It showcases the intensity of the battle and the upper hand Guts holds. The sheer force and excitement that went into this single page is astronomical. A whole array of energy in one swing of his sword. Then Guts, beaten and broken but victorious, stands over the monster's head, now above him. The irony of the beast's high horse attitude earlier is shown in this very page. Guts fires arrow after arrow into the Snake Baron while he slowly burns to death and takes great satisfaction from it, showing himself to be an even bigger monster than the Snake Baron could ever hope to be, and leaves with his sword on his back and a grim shadow over his face. We start out with this image of what looks like a bird flying over the dark and gloomy mountains. The symbolism of a bird is very important, as it's a common theme thrown in Berserk. The bright glow of the bird over the darkly lit valley contrasts nicely, showing a glimmer of hope in an otherwise desolate land. It could be a reference to the Band of the Hawk and Griffith himself, as he is represented by a bright bird. However, one could also argue that since Puck is writing it, that it's more of a representation of a brighter aspect in Guts' life, especially given the dark force Guts gives off in conflict with Puck's more gentle nature. In any case, it's revealed that Puck was actually hitching a ride on a bird so he could follow Guts. He's thick. He's thick. However, he can't find Guts and assumes that he was eaten by wolves, only to find him right next to him. We get a goofy moment between Puck and Guts where Puck explains that he finds Guts interesting and believes he'll be seeing a lot of cool things if he sticks around him. The reason behind this mostly falls in line with Puck's boredom, which of course I do want to discuss later, as there is a part where it indicates that. But obviously Puck wants to go on more wild and crazy adventures with Guts. But Guts rudely declines his offer. He also states openly he doesn't like elves. This is another important thing to keep mind of. I know I've been foreshadowing a lot, and it's irritating, yes, but this is actually a reference to a previous elf that Guts has actually met before. Now, what I find so amusing about this is Kentaro Miura probably just threw in this line for no reason, but it's just cool how detailed that single line ends up being, given Guts had actually met another elf in the past before Puck. So Guts follows that up with a very harsh statement explaining that he hates weak people. There's nothing that gets on Guts' nerves more than those who can't defend themselves. He then leaves Puck in a puddle of water. As he continues his journey, it begins to rain, and a horse carriage pulls up beside him as an old man offers him a ride. After Guts states that he's not interested, the old man budges, to which Guts explains that it's for their own sake he doesn't. The rain is very fitting for the life that Guts lives. Life has become gloomy and cold, and since then it's been constant, non-stop rain. In any case, Guts explains that he's being pursued by evil spirits. However, the man explains that there's nothing to worry about because he claims that God is on his side. He also explains that he has a luck spirit with him, and lo and behold, Puck makes another goofy face. So Guts decides to go with it, thinking to himself that it's not his fault, and he did warn them. We're then given an image of the dark life that Guts lives following shortly behind him as his brand activates. So Puck and Guts have an awkward exchange before the young girl named Colette appears. Interestingly enough, she actually was in the anime, but not for the arc you would think she would be in. While this part was in the 2016 anime, which we do not speak of, she was in the 90s anime as well, but had brown hair instead of blonde. What made this so interesting was she was the replacement for Puck in the bar scene at the beginning of the Snake Baron arc. The old guy also so happens to be in that episode. In any case, she gives him some wine and he takes a drink and then drops it on Puck because fuck you, Puck, you piece of shit. So she asks why he's covered in such terrible wounds, and he repeats what he said earlier, and they notice the sword he has behind him. The old man states it's big enough to cut a horse, which is an ironic statement given that's actually something that happens in the manga. This early in the story, the reader is able to comprehend all the ideas Kentaro Miura plans to have for Berserk in the future. In any case, Guts and the old man have a philosophical disagreement. He calls Guts a mercenary, to which Guts decides not to deny, so the old man states he's not the biggest fan of mercenaries, that the idea of killing others and making a living out of it is not something he considers impressive, to which Guts very obviously views as harsh. He explains that he has a personal reason, and that his nephew died in the war, another nameless soldier, and then we're given an image of how Guts views the world, at least in his current state, basically explaining that those who die doing what they want are much more fortunate than those who die too weak to defend themselves. It's obvious that Guts has a very personal reason for thinking so. This is the cynical way that Guts views the world. Those who are too weak to defend themselves and die because of it deserve to die. So the next part of the chapter is Guts going to sleep and having a nightmare, and at this point we obviously don't know what the nightmare represents or what anything is. It's to be explained later, but what I love is how much art went into forging this hellish nightmare. The dream begins with our hero Guts walking through a long corridor naked. The floor is a huge puddle and there are walls on both sides. There is no left or right, only forward. Until this point, Guts has fought and continued to go on his perilous journey with no help. Guts is naked, representing his vulnerability, and the eye at the top represents a gateway into the soul. This is implying that now that Guts is asleep and vulnerable, something is invading his dream to distort it. So anyway, Guts steps on a spiked arrow and this fetus creature shows up again. Like I said, that thing will be important later. Just seemingly out of nowhere, it poofs out of existence, so Guts wakes up and the implications turn out to be true. A creature was in fact invading Guts' mind in the sleep. And how fitting, it has a single eye, much like the eye in his dream. Guts steps out of the carriage and looks around for more demons. The girl mistakenly steps out of the carriage when asked not to and ends up impaled. Then an army of skeletons appear from the mist. Guts lays waste to them swing after swing with such force and energy in every image. However, as he turns, he comes to find that the priest was decapitated by Colette, who is now possessed by a demon. She slowly approaches Guts and manages to put him in a trance, stabbing him before he snaps out of it and cuts her in half. Then he murders the rest of the skeleton demons and the morning comes, implying that the deed is done and the troubles are over. What I found interesting was that this is really the first implication of Guts' true self. That this cold and dark facade he puts up is exactly that, a facade. Guts looks at the lifeless body, and what I love about this image is that it refuses to show you her full body, only the puddle of blood in her arm, and Guts gives it a look of irritation and slight guilt, to which Puck tries to console him and explain that it isn't his fault. And Guts laughs, agreeing with him, and says an extremely ironic statement. If I had to worry about the ants I crushed beneath my feet, I couldn't walk. A funny statement coming from him, given it's the exact mindset Griffith followed. It's obvious that because this is how Griffith views life, Guts copied his mindset, showing how greatly Griffith affected him, but he's only using his mindset to tell himself it's okay, to tell himself it's not his fault, because that's what he perceives reality as. He walks out of the woods over the millions of dead skeletons and continues on his dark journey, pushing on no matter what. We then enter the next chapter with ease as it opens with the execution of a woman accused of forming ties with demons. We're then given an unsettling image of our next villain, the Count, a morbidly obese and disgusting man sitting on a throne. What I find so amusing about this image is the symbolism of the previous apostles within the series. The Snake Baron was likely a symbol of pride, the demon girl at the beginning was also likely a symbol of lust, and in this context, the Count appears to resemble gluttony. Although this is just an interesting pattern I noticed, I'm not 100% sure that there are apostles for every deadly sin. After the poor woman's head is cut off, Guts picks it up to the guard's disapproval. Her brother calls out for her and the guards threaten to kill him next, to which the guard then turns to Guts, who is holding the severed head, and out ensues a fight. The severed head is thrown to the Count, who takes a look at its design and notices a curse on the forehead, then looks to Guts and notices his as well. Guts then marks the blood across his throat and leaves. The Count then chalks it up as a declaration of war and smushes the head between his fingers. It's interesting he chooses decapitation as his method of execution, as it is a death in which the mind separates from the body, which is a similar idea to those who are pushed to sacrifice their loved ones. Guts runs down an alleyway and is stopped once again by a group of guards blocking his path. After brutally cutting his way through their bodies like sandpaper, and a repeat of the narration we were given before, one by one he murders the guards in cold blood. The most fascinating aspect of these battles is Miura's ability to create the setting as they ensue. Take for instance this shot of Guts slicing this man in half with this building in the background, then afterwards we're given an overhead image with the details of the lower staircase in the top right corner, establishing where Guts is, where the soldiers are, and what the setting is. This sets up for the next image in which these people are standing on the staircase in question to aim crossbows. You know where everything is and in what position it resides, and you're never alienated or taken away from it, which is an interesting concept given the 2016 anime took this idea and fucked it up entirely. It may seem minor, but it's an aspect that Berserk is very, very good at. After a cute little exchange with the cinnamon roll that is Puck, the creepy villain of today's edition, Zondark, finally appears. A man absolutely covered in armor resembling the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz, who towers over Guts and holds this huge hammer representing might and power, a weapon used by the gods. It's amusing how with this hammer he ends up killing almost everyone except for Guts himself before having both his hammer and helmet destroyed and stepped on by Guts, who now stands above him, implying that he's a commoner lower than Guts' boot. In an instant he stood at the top with power and authority, but it was all destroyed by the Black Swordsman, which is not the first time that this happens in Berserk, as this is a common theme throughout the entirety of Berserk. Standing at the top above everyone else, only to be knocked down a peg and put below the status of a lowly commoner. This sets up his want and need for revenge, which is an obvious point on the surface, but looking at what his hammer represents, it gives us even more reason to understand why he so desperately wants to kill the Black Swordsman. So next, this creepy alleyway guy throws a smoke bomb and tells the Black Swordsman to follow him. On the way, they notice the townsfolk are on edge, and the creepy man explains that it's because of the dictatorship the Count holds on this town. We're then given a downright beautiful image of his laboratory, books scattered everywhere, messy shelves, and creatures of all kinds. It really gives you a good indication of his personality and who he really is at his core. There's also a lone skull at the forefront of the image representing the impending doom. A lot of the creatures on his shelves are very strange and bizarre. In any case, the man explains that he wants Guts to kill the Count. The hood comes off to show us his hideous face, explaining that the Count cut up his face and ate bits and pieces. And then shows Guts a tool he had preserved in his possession for a while, a baylet. It should be noted that while the term baylet itself has no quantifiable meaning, the Syrian word for devil is Beirit, which is also associated with the Syrian belief of hell. Vargas reveals that his face has become mangled, which we have to thank for the Count. Upon my first reading of this reveal, I can honestly say that the art of the Count doing these horrible atrocities made me feel extremely uncomfortable. I think part of what makes them so horrifying is that Kentaro Miura manages to use a lack of detail rather than the common hyper-detailed drawings he's typically known for. Despite how human the Count seems in appearance, he resembles more of a creature when committing these atrocities, made even more horrifying when it's heavily implied he's eating the poor man's family. Just the sheer half-human, half-sluggish, nearly reptilian monster design being cast in the shadow makes it feel so much more horrifying. In any case, the man asks Guts to kill the Count after it had been revealed that the baylet in question belonged to the Count himself. Guts begins to explain that he'll be killing the Count, but it won't be for anyone's sake except his own. As this goes on, the Count gives Zondark a new curse ability, and the way he does it is just Jesus fucking Christ. What? As Guts comes to an agreement with Vargas, Zondark invades the lab and engages in an almost immediate battle with Guts. This is one of my favorite parts of the Count arc because of how quickly paced and unique this entire fight is. Zondark's curse gives him these slug-like abilities wherein he has these slimy tentacle-like arms that allow him to move at an insane pace, and the way it's drawn with so much emphasis on motion makes it feel solid and palpable despite being so disfigured and disjointed. It's like the humiliation that Zondark got from being put down by Guts filled him with this drive for revenge, and that drive for revenge is translated in these harsh and viscerally rage-inducing blows that he throws at the Black Swordsman. Often at times this part gets compared to Parasite, and I'd like to think that Parasite may have been inspired by Berserk, but I'm not going to make any confirmation. In any case, he gets smashed by the collapsing laboratory, and all three of them escape together before parting ways, and Guts now having the baylet in his possession. But we then find out that Vargas has been captured, and what I found interesting was the difference in Puck's reaction versus Guts' reaction. Guts remains rather indifferent, but still slightly bothered by the man's sheer helplessness and pure hatred for the Count. He doesn't lift a finger to help, but it's mostly because of one simple reason, that reason being Vargas is kind of ready to die. This is his moment of glory, and Guts isn't about to take it away from him. This is Vargas basically fighting down to the last breath in the hopes that the Count will pay for the awful things he's done. Besides, even if Vargas lived, there's no way he'd have the will to keep going after seeing the Count die. Despite Guts' obvious indifference, it's clear what Vargas said bothered him, because, well, he saw the rage Vargas had for the Count was very reminiscent of the rage he has in his heart for Griffith. I love this gorgeous image of Guts emerging from the dark alleyway into the light. As Vargas' execution takes its course, Puck tries to stop it, but with no avail, and the way this page is put together is pretty damn unique.
One panel is Vargas shouting at the top of his lungs, and under it is an axe coming down, but the way it's composed, it looks like the axe is already through him as he passionately screams for Guts to avenge his death, before we see a lone image of his head flying through the air, and the vicious look of pain and passion in his eyes, accompanied by the fearful eye of Guts, before he turns to see his biggest nightmare with Vargas's face, instead of its regular face. Vargas's last look of desperation will forever be ingrained into Guts' biggest fears and regrets, because he fears that in his quest for revenge, he'll fail just like Vargas, and have that same desperate look in his eyes as well. After looking at Vargas's head in the pile of executed bodies, Guts swears to take his vengeance for Vargas. We're treated to a gorgeous image of the town before transitioning to the Count's dark face. Puck ends up being captured and taken to the room of the Count's daughter, Teresia, whom he has been keeping safe from the world of heretics. From this point forward, however, the arc starts to become less dark and a little more sad, because you wouldn't really expect a villain so creepy and evil to have a family or even a shred of humanity, but that's what I feel made Berserk so genuinely unique. The Count attempts to show affection to his daughter, not sexual, you fucking and she still remains terrified of him, not letting him near her, even though he just gave her Puck as a present. The Count's angry face afterwards is horrifying, and it supplements the gentle and sweet nature he showed to his daughter beforehand. Letting Puck out of his cage, unaware that her father is no longer human, Teresia explains that the Count only began the witch hunts after her mother was killed by her pagan abductors. From there we move on to a battle between Zondark and Guts as he invades the Count's castle, a revenge that is just as humiliating and quickly paced as the first round that preceded it. Once again, Zondark, on a physical level, stands above Guts on the staircase, showcasing his stature and how much higher than Guts he believes himself to be, and the irony is that Zondark turned to the idea of becoming a monster, a full-fledged demon with a horrifying body, just so that he could get his revenge, only to be overpowered by Guts once again. And once he's given a second chance to take back his revenge, he tells Guts his weakness, and it ends up being his downfall. He gave up his humanity just for this one single purpose, and he still failed. Puck and Teresia continue their discussion about her father, and we're given an image of her with her family, and we see the Count with a stern but caring look on his face, determined to fight for his family. It's completely different from the nightmarish look he has now. Guts continues to lay waste to the Count's forces, and with each swing chops them to pieces like they're nothing, especially this image right here where you can see the sword traveling through the shield despite being such a still image. It's like it's moving even though it's not. We're even given this hilarious yet forceful image of Guts knocking this door open, as he declares his fight to the Count to avenge Vargas. One part about this battle I love is how the Count transforms into his slug form. Whereas most other franchises would make it loud and obnoxious, and whereas the previous fight didn't even show the transformation, the Count plays more into the element of surprise and feeling of grounded naturality, starting with the front position of his body popping up from the ground in a seemingly connected way, and how it also corresponds with the design of his clothing, as his body morphs into a huge creature without feeling like a transformation. Many parts of the Count's body is shown in a disproportionate way to reveal his horrifying full form. The image perspective is shown from behind a totem pole, as if the reader is hiding from him. One thing I love about the Apostles is that their look and design is similar to that of Renaissance demons. They look so disproportionately unnatural, yet still solid and real, and that's what makes it terrifying. So Puck does the Chad stride. This is a manga where people get raped and brutally murdered. The Count's monstrosity isn't just shown in his design, namely when he smashes the head of one of his men by accident because of how preoccupied he was with Guts. But Guts puts up a fight, especially in cutting his eye, before we're given a reflection of the two. Now both of them only have one working eye, and they're both equally as monstrous as the other. It shows that despite how much larger the Count is than Guts, the two in terms of power are on an almost equal playing field. We also see the Count attempt to kill Puck as he protects the Baillet, and this is kind of a fun moment as it takes the size proportion idea even further. Puck is the tiniest thing in the building, yet still has the courage to go off against this gigantic slug. Afterwards, the Count's daughter leaves her room, as her dreams of leaving the room hold more importance to her than actually trying to figure out why her room capsized to begin with. Teresia comes in and sees the Count for the monster that he is. I love how Teresia's expression shows the sheer trauma in what she just saw. Like she just saw her dad for what he really is. Guts gets back up, and his body is broken beyond belief, covered in blood, scratches, bruises, and so many parts of his body bent where they shouldn't be, but he still persists and continues to fight on against this monster. And as the Count makes his move on Guts, he cheats by using the horrified girl as a hostage, showing the lengths he's willing to go to win in a fight. He then fires his cannon into the Count's face in one of the most satisfying images in the battle. As you see the Count's entire body, and the cannonball make its way through it. The tremendous detail is shortly lived as Guts fucking slices the Count by using the sword with his jaw. How do you not love this manga? Okay, my friend called this boring, and I'm just... How? How is this boring? He then lays waste to the Count, torturing and cutting him again and again, right in front of his daughter, giving her a horrifying glimpse of the hell he's endured in his entire life. Then he bleeds on the Beylit and the dimension changes to a form similar to the artwork known as relativity, a piece of art that showcases several dimensions with their own gravity. Metaphorically, staircases commonly represent a working journey to get to your goal, which is a theme very heavy in Berserk, especially with the notable quote about the bonfire of dreams that comes later, where every person is on a different journey, but in this context, that does not make a lot of sense. With the way that the staircases curve and move in all sorts of directions, it's likely it represents confusion and uneasiness, which is the feeling of the current scene, especially given the reader does not know who God Hand is or what is really going on. Staircases play a big role in the imagery of Berserk as they represent stature and power, or even a journey. Shortly after, God Hand is finally shown, and once again the imagery of staircases is present. Griffith stands on top of the staircase as Guts stands at the bottom, showing their positions in power, and Griffith has ascended to the top while Guts stays at the bottom of the road. However, Guts quickly and angrily runs up the staircase in a fit of rage and puts every bit of anger he can into a violent swing, but it proves to not work as he's thrown back against the wall, all while Griffith doesn't even blink an eye. Godhand then turns to the subject at hand, asking the Count to make a sacrifice if he wishes to be more powerful, and in a matter of minutes the rules of the Beylit is explained in a way that isn't tedious or boring. Rather than being an info dump, it's just kind of thrown in naturally to explain how the Beylit works, as if it's common knowledge and you're merely learning, which is much better than setting everyone in cafes. As the Count tries to sacrifice Guts, he's told that he can't sacrifice his enemies. Not to mention, Guts' brand means that he's already been sacrificed. Godhand tries to convince the Count to sacrifice Teresia, but to no avail, so Godhand lets her in on a little secret, much to the Count's disappointment. What I love about this part is that we see the Count, who was once powerful, now desperate to keep his daughter from seeing the truth. That same look of desperation his victims once had on their faces is written all over his now. As the Count hesitates, the Godhand proceed to show him and Teresia the horrible truth about her mother's death. It's revealed that the Count offered her as a sacrifice after finding her willingly participating in a pagan orgy, but being unable to kill her for her blasphemy like the others. It should be noted that the pagan orgies appear quite frequently in this franchise, and that this centaur creature actually appears later in the series. The Count's look of sheer visceral rage is detailed to show just what emotions are stirring up inside. Hate, heartbreak, disappointment, betrayal, all of it is shown in this extremely disgusted expression. Afterwards we're treated to gorgeous yet horrifying art of the Count feasting on the orgy, his head staying at the top, while his many mouths feast upon his wife and her partners as she hangs desperately at the bottom in desperation. We're shown Griffith's former beauty right next to his current darker side, which will be a recurring image much later. Then in the next page, Godhand stands tall over Teresia. I love how it's Godhand that dominates the image, and Teresia looks so small and helpless. A large, vast gate of hell made by tortured souls opens in preparation for a sacrifice, and carry the horrified Count to the pits of hell, with Vargas at the front, which I never actually noticed. And what's so strange is that a monster that seemed so goddamn evil, and that has done so many horrible things, managed to show even the slightest bit of humanity by letting his daughter live. It didn't redeem him as a character, but it was the best possible thing he could do in the situation, showing that despite how much of a monster he's become, there's still a small sliver of humanity left in him, be it minuscule. Guts puts us all into firing a cannonball at Griffith, but it remains unsuccessful, and the Godhand leaves with a dreaded silence. We're then treated to a gorgeously depressing night sky as the hell leaves us. Teresia, horrified and left without purpose, having watched her only parent left be dragged to hell, attempts to kill herself, and what comes up is one of the more controversial parts of the manga. Basically, Guts tells her to go ahead and kill herself, and acts like a pompous asshole after what he just did to her family. Then the building breaks, she falls, and Guts lets her grab onto his sword, saving her, but then she tells him that she hates him and will kill him someday, and he just walks away until Puck discovers that he too feels hurt after what just happened. And this is the most powerful way to end the arc because of one simple thing: Guts was intentionally being an asshole. The thing about Guts is that he lost everything to the hands of Griffith, everything he held dear, and because of that, revenge is the only thing that's kept him alive, that's given him a purpose, something he realizes when she feels the need to kill herself. Guts knows that after what he had done, as necessary as it was for the benefit of others, she will never forgive him for what he did, but the last thing he wants is for her to commit suicide. So what better way to respond than giving her a reason to live? I mean, obviously he wanted her to live, given he saved her life with the very sword that saved his own several times. He decided to just let her grow up and set out in pursuit of revenge, even if it's revenge on him, because that's better than nothing. This is the only thing he can do to help her, and the fact that he realizes that feels almost heartbreaking. Not to mention, this is the first time in the series that Guts actually bothered to show some form of emotion besides anger or pleasure at the pain of others. Much like the Count, Beneath that awful, monstrous exterior, there's a person with feeling.
Kentaro Miura is a famous mangaka entirely for this Berserk series. A lot of care goes into it. He is a very detailed artist who just goes fucking insane with his talent. 1997 is the best adaptation of Berserk out there because it's so ripe with detail, but at the expense of that, it tends to use a lot of stills. However, even with all these stills and all these basic shots, it's really impressive. They use cheap tactics with the animation, yes, but they always try their damnedest to make something look like it's moving. People aren't a fan of doing that because CGI is a little bit easier. Gets it out yearly, this and that. You have anime like Hellsing Ultimate and Made in Abyss, which are traditional and use a lot of detail, so some anime are a fan of it, but not all. That's where the problem in adapting Berserk is. The soundtrack to Berserk was composed by experimental electronica, progressive psychedelic ambient avant-garde rock musician Susumu Hirasawa, and I can't think of a better musician to construct the soundtrack for Berserk because he is a genius. Susumu Hirasawa is good at making both emotionally slow and darker themes for Berserk's nature, but he's also good at making the exciting ones, namely his really popular and hype song, Forces. His music style, and really the kind of music he makes, is orchestral, but also spacey and unique. Not to mention catchy as hell, and his voice, oh my god, his voice. I love his Byakuya White Tiger Field album. It should also be noted he made the soundtrack to Paprika, which is not a favorite movie of mine, but it's a favorite soundtrack, that's for damn sure. But it isn't just Susumu who is doing the music, he's just responsible for a great deal of it. There's also Pen Pals who made the fucking iconic opening, which is a sloppy guitar riff with these lazy vocals, but it's actually good. It gets better the more you listen to it in a hilarious way, and the slower, kind of somber ending song by Silver Fins, nothing special, but something to note. So, great visuals, great music, but what about the story? 1997's story is excellent in execution and excellent in the way it's handled. In emotion, in acting, in presentation, in composition, in faithfulness to the manga. The only problem is that it's not 28 episodes. And it doesn't have a season 2. Unless, of course, you count 2016, but why the fuck would you do that? They just needed, like, 2 episodes of the Count arc, which would have benefited the show greatly, maybe a scene with Skull Knight at any point in the arc after Guts leaves, and maybe like a final episode where the Skull Knight saves everyone, but it's only 25 episodes, and it's just not enough. It's just not enough. Berserk 1997 series is notable for leaving the viewer with a middle finger and saying read the manga. It was always an advertisement for the manga, but it translated it so fucking well that I don't care. But with that, we can just start with Berserk 1997's first episode, where it all begins with the Snake Baron. The first episode of Berserk can seem kind of annoying from the perspective of someone who just finished the series as a whole, and I'm sure there are many reasons for this. On a technical basis, it adds nothing to the anime whatsoever. If anything, it just takes away from it. Because look at it like this. The anime ends with a cliffhanger because they only had the budget for 25 episodes. So why even have this first episode that takes place after the series when you could just skip it and have a proper ending instead? Well, simple. Because it's the pilot of the fucking series. series. The thing about anime is that first impressions are actually pretty important.
The Snake Baron episode is a thing because it wishes to keep in the well-done, badass, mysterious, and edgy beginning of Berserk, because if it started at the Golden Age arc, you would probably be bored. The first episode is well animated, visceral, and violent, just like the first chapter in the manga, and it adapts the entire chapter to a full-length 20-minute episode. Almost exactly as the manga would have wanted, but it begs some questions. Number 1, why didn't you just include the Count? Number 2, why didn't you include Puck and replace him with the Carriage family? Number 3, if you weren't going to include the Carriage family part, why even have them here to begin with? Nonsensically uncanon the first episode is, and even though it spreads blatant misinformation of the manga's story, it works from an entertainment standpoint, seen entirely in its over-the-top fight. And even though they made story decisions that make pretty much no sense, it partially doesn't matter because they never intended to give it another season. And Berserk 2016 is a good indication as to why it can't have another season. Not just from a visual standpoint, but from a story standpoint as well. The 1997 series, from a visual standpoint, is faithful to its manga predecessor, but story-wise only adapts about 80% of its source material's Golden Age arc. The other 20% it completely ignores, half of which that 20% is them making decisions that make no sense, and the other they're ignoring because it's fucking Berserk and they can get really screwed up sometimes. Berserk is the victim of a lot of censorship, but that's partially because the things that happen in Berserk are fucked up to an indescribable degree. So it makes sense if they're going to cut out some dark shit, and it's not like the series doesn't get dark at times, something I'll get into much later, of course. This begs the question as to why I love this series anyway. Even if they do leave out 2 characters I fucking love for no reason. Even if they adapt the Snake Baron arc but ignore the Count, and even if they ended it with a cliffhanger which could have been avoided if they had left the Snake Baron the fuck alone. But it is good at adapting Berserk's story in 2 ways: development and dialogue, and keeping up with the central theme of the series, whilst still being an advertisement for the manga. It's an adaptation that shows how much it loves the manga in a very respectful way, and in a sense I think that's partially a compliment to the source material. The 1997 series makes up for what it leaves out by making what it leaves in entertaining and crafted with the utmost care a series like this deserves, and that's seen entirely off the back of its main lead, Guts. Guts is a pretty well done main character because a lot of what defines him as a character is that he plays life on hard mode. Essentially, Guts is an example of a character whose life is literal fucking hell and gets worse the more he goes through it. Name anything awful that can happen to a person, he's been through it. Yes, even abuse, even rape, even losing loved ones, even hell itself. Actual hell. However, none of it feels forced or thrown onto him as a character just to be suffer porn, which is bizarre given just how much shit he's been subject to. I guess I can explain it like this. Guts was literally born from the body of his dead mother, who was lynched on a tree. He was basically left alone to die in a pool of blood, abandoned forever, until a mercenary group led by a man named Gambino
drop it like the NASDAQ
takes him in. A woman in this group named Shisu grabs him up to take care of him. This basically means that his very existence alone is a miracle, because if the mercenary group never found him, he would have died alone under the body of his mother. But when he reaches the age of 3, Shisu dies from the plague virus, and he's left to be taken care of by Gambino. However, Gambino ends up training him to become a fighter by subjecting him to harsh abuse, and as he keeps getting older, Gambino keeps getting more and more bitter, and blaming him for the death of Shisu, until he tries to kill him one night and falls on a sword.
Shizu.
Causing Guts to run away from the mercenaries, and end up fighting for his life, a solo mercenary, for years on end. In fact, Gambino hates Guts so much that he even at one point sold him for a night as a prostitute to his black mercenary mate, Donovan. He let his friend rape him for 3 silver coins. Something left out of the anime, rightfully so, as it's extremely traumatic and painful to watch. Not to mention, it caught me completely off guard, but it did put a smile on my face when Guts got his revenge, which is something I can't say for characters like Revi, and I think the most sickening aspect of it is I I kind of understand Gambino's perspective. I mean, at least from a human standpoint. Gambino is an abusive piece of shit who lashes out with anger at anybody who just so happens to be nearby. It's not just Guts who is subject to his frustrated attacks. Sometimes his other mercenaries, sometimes his dog, but the reason is because, to a lesser extent anyway, his life kind of sucks. When you find someone you care about deeply dies from natural causes, you don't have anyone you can blame it on, and because he doesn't have anybody to blame it on, he's angry. Angry at the world and angry at himself, made even worse when he loses a part of himself. His attitude grows worse when he loses his leg, and this plays into a harsh aspect of his character. He treats Guts the way he does because he reminds him of Shisu, and the most depressing aspect of it is that Guts only ever wanted his approval. Guts only wished to make Gambino praise him for something. It's why he smiles when he finally got his first job right. And it's why he lived in denial when Donovan told him that he sold him for 3 silver coins. Even when killing Donovan, he refused to believe that Gambino would even try doing that. And this plays an integral role into Guts' anxieties and lack of self-confidence when he gets older. Gambino taught him to fight, and that ends up being the only thing he's good at. It ends up being the only way he can express himself, and because of that, he ends up having a talent for it. But socially and personality-wise, Guts is awkward and even kind of aggressive towards other people. He doesn't like being touched, he doesn't like being around people, and he doesn't like talking to people, and part of this is because he was never really exposed to love or affection. The closest he even gets to it is being told good job every once in a while, unless of course you count getting raped affection, which I doubt you do. So because of this, affection, love, or really just interacting with other people in a way that isn't harsh or negative is something alien to him, and because of that, it kind of scares him. Fighting is the only thing he's familiar with, which is why he only feels truly free when he's raising his sword in battle, winning every fight, which takes me to Griffith and the Band of the Hawk, and of course also takes me to episode 2 where the story really begins. Essentially, it starts off with Guts engaging in a battle with Big Dick Pazuzu, and off the very bat, the battle sets standards for what Guts is really facing here. The people around watching the fight are impressed by Guts' courage in going against such a strong opponent, and some of them even go on to mention how Pazuzu has killed a bear in his lifetime. But Guts isn't afraid. If anything, he's more concerned about the price of his head, rather than whether or not he'll actually win. This tells you 3 things about Guts' character without overtly stating it in the open. Number 1, he doesn't fear death. Number 2, he's confident in his abilities. And number 3, he doesn't have a goal other than his next meal. This means that this routine is familiar to Guts and that his life basically involves him traveling the world and only living for money, but it's also shown in this fight against Pazuzu. Guts takes strong, forceful motive in each particular swing. In fact, Pazuzu only gets 2 chances to get his own swing in, one of which Guts blocks with his sword, and the other of which takes a blow to his head. However, Guts blocking it damaged the axe, so the blow to his head only knocks off his helmet, and Guts wins the battle mercilessly. This shows the viewer that, again, Guts does not fear death, because if he hadn't blocked the first blow with the axe, he would have been decapitated. Afterwards, of course, Guts has an awkward interaction with a man desperate to hire him. And when he leaves, the Band of the Hawk, who just so happened to be overseeing this fight, ambush him to get his money. And once again, Guts puts up a vigorous fight, killing one of the members, fighting off the second strongest, and only losing to the hands of Griffith, the leader. After 3 days of a horrendous nightmare, only being calmed by a naked girl comforting him, Guts wakes up and meets Best Boy Judo, and I can't think of a better way to introduce such a lovable character. Despite the cold nature a great deal the other members of the Band of the Hawk show Guts, rightfully so considering he killed one of their members, Judo responds to Guts with understanding and friendliness in his attitude. Afterwards, Griffith and Guts engage in a fight, and stakes are raised almost immediately. If Guts wins, he can do whatever he wants. But if Griffith wins, Guts has to be a member of the Band of the Hawk and Griffith's property.
No, not in the sexual sense, although the series does question that. From the very get-go, it's obvious that Guts is gonna lose this fight. Firstly, if he were to win, then the Band of the Hawk appearing at all would be pointless, and secondly, he already lost against Griffith one time.
So what's the point of having this battle at all? Simply put, the battle's main point is to set up an event that can be looked back upon later. Towards the end of the anime, in episode 19,
Guts and Griffith have another fight with the same circumstances, and while the two fights are in similar fashion to one another, the outcome of both is completely different. The first fight acts as a catalyst for the second fight, so you can see just how far along these characters have come, and see just how much has changed over the course of 19 episodes. Not only that, from a setting standpoint, the two are completely different as well. The first fight takes place in a grass field, whereas the second takes place in a snowy area. In the first fight, it's playful, with a peaceful tone contrasting in such a serious fight. In the second, however, there's a snowy field, the cold snow standing as a symbol for sadness and bleakness, which fits given it's the moment that Guts leaves the Band of the Hawk. Do me a personal favor. Watch episode 2, then watch episode 19, without watching anything in between them, and see how similar yet different the episodes are. Just over the course of 18 episodes, so much has changed and happened, but how it gets to this progression is the most important part. The beginning of Guts trying to settle into the Band of the Hawk is very slow, some would even say boring. I mean, for the first 4 episodes he's in the Band of the Hawk, nothing really happens. The group stands around and talks, they have some generic missions and end up using Guts as the important part, but nothing major or game-changing really happens. And Guts doesn't feel any more comfortable after 3 years than when he began. There is an instant early on in the show when Guts is a brand new member where Corcus tries to kill Guts, and Casca tells him to fuck off. And when Guts tries to thank her, she acts like a stuck-up bitch, even though she was cuddling him naked in his entire recovery to keep him warm. And even after 3 years, she still bitches at him and calls him worthless because of her irrational, jealous nature in how much Griffith values him. Which is because she herself loves Griffith, and despite knowing that she doesn't have a chance with him, she still remains frustrated and angry that anybody gets more attention from Griffith than her. And the weirdest part is, I should hate her as a character, but oddly enough, I don't. And I feel like part of why that is has to do with the way her character was handled. On the one hand, I think she's very selfish and arguably annoying, but on the other, she learns from her mistakes. The thing about Casca that separates her from most characters like her is that over the course of the show, she learns to move on from her feelings with Griffith. Not only that, her crush on Griffith isn't there for no reason. She tries to stay concentrated on her work, but sometimes she just can't help but get jealous. It's not like she ever gets obnoxious about it or takes her anger out on anyone for it in any way, she just tends to be rude about it and visibly upset towards Guts. I think the thing about both Guts and Casca is that as much as the two hate each other towards the beginning, they're polar opposites, but still two sides to the same coin. Both of them never grew up with a proper family or even with love or affection from a parent. One of them was the subject of sexual harassment, the other one wasn't but was really close. Both of them killed their sexual abusers and because of that grew up to be good warriors, and now both of them fight for Griffith's dream because of the respect they have for him. My favorite part in the anime is the battle for Doldry because it's the most satisfyingly well-written part of the Golden Age arc. The thing is, most franchises that have romance as a side plot typically aren't all that well written. The romance develops, but they don't develop the romance in a way that's satisfying or good, they just have the context of romance there. But Berserk is a rare instance where despite the fact that the romance is a side genre of the story, it still manages to be well written, grounded, and real without it focusing all of its time on romance. The first moment where Casca and Guts aren't fighting is the battle for Doldry, and oddly there can't be a more realistic way for the two to come together. Basically, in this part of the series, Casca is on her period in the middle of a battle, and of course a lot of sexist pigs threaten to capture her as a sex slave, making her mad in a state where she's emotionally off balance. But because her period is so severe, she grows faint and sickly and falls off of a cliff, and when Guts tries to save her from falling off the cliff, he comes falling down with her. And this takes the intense and brutal nature of the show a completely different direction. In this event, Guts takes her to a cave, takes her clothes off because they're wet, and holds her close to him for warmth. And once he finds out she's on her period, we're given one of the most well-written lines in the series. I think the reason Guts is going to such great lengths to keep Casca from freezing to death, despite the fact that they hate each other, is, well, yes, because she's a huge part of the team, but also because she was there for him when he was in great need as well. The moment is sweet, calm, and a great way to end off the episode. In fact, visually it's so well written that the Dynasty Warriors video game used it as a background for the menu when you get to that part of the series. Even then, she doesn't really show him the true nature until the most iconic part in the Golden Age arc, the 100-man battle, a situation in which he defends Casca with his very life. The 100-man battle scene is so iconic because not only is it one of the life gambles that Guts goes through in a very aggressive and intense way, in which he hits a very impressive achievement just a hair away from death, with some of the most expressive and well-done animation within this entire series, but also because of the calm moment that comes afterwards. The gorgeous image of Guts finally laying down to rest after laying waste to 100 men, if not even more than that. There's just something so calming and beautiful about his broken body and his smile as he rests against the tree. But afterwards, we're given yet another calm and beautiful moment where Guts and Casca have a very poetic conversation. I think the most powerful part about this scene is that for the first time, Guts finally opens up to someone. Granted, he had conversations with Judo and Griffith, but he never really opened up or gave much closure about how he feels. A lot of the time, he just kept it bottled up or didn't take note of it. But for the first time in the series, Guts opens up to Casca and tells her how he's feeling, and the way it's done is phenomenal.
こうして眺めてると、なんだかあの明かり一つ一つに連中のそんなちっぽけな夢とか思いが宿ってるって、そんな風に見えてくるぜ。
夢のかがり火か。
ほ、うまいこと言うね。どっかのお姫さんかと思ったぜ。
Or when he finally makes love to Casca after his leaving the Band of the Hawk for so long. Casca shows her frustration and anger at him for leaving, but shortly after the two discover how much they really care about each other, and end up making love near a waterfall in a very beautiful and romantic way. Followed up by afterwards, where Guts has an anxiety attack and awkwardly lashes out at Casca, which I believe is because this is the first time he's consented to sex. His previous experience was very much so not consensual. And it's likely that an experience like that can cause trauma and fear in ever opening up to others sexually. The moment gives you an indication of his character in a vulnerable state, opening up to the person that he discovered he was in love with, which is why, in the first chapter, it made pretty much no sense why he would even bother fucking the demon lady. It just didn't feel like it was a part of his character. The scene between Guts and Casca making love is beautiful because it develops both characters in a beautiful and natural way, backed up with the well-done and beautiful progression that led to this moment. A lot of instances in trying to become accustomed to the Band of the Hawk involve Guts being forced into a social situation, and starting off as a very closed-off and antisocial tight-ass, only to end up rolling with it anyway. Like when he has his first successful mission and Pippin and Judo force him to join the party they're holding for him. And at first he protests and even hits Pippin in the face, but decides he'll go with it anyway. It's a very cute moment for such a dark and gory franchise. One of my favorite moments is when he and Griffith have a splash fight, not only because it's gay as fuck, but also because Guts does a lot of protesting until he eventually decides that a little goofing around is fine. It's also because it's so strange to see someone like Griffith held at such a godly and inhuman standard being so childish and carefree.
For a moment, you get to see a general have a bit of silly fun with one of his soldiers. The thing about Griffith, though, is that nobody can really put into words who he is as a person. Take, for instance, the conversation Judo and Guts have about him. Judo himself struggles to really put into words why he serves Griffith or who Griffith is as a person.
Griffith ってどんなやつなんだ？
わかんない。
ああ？
もしかしたら一生かかっても手に入らない確信みたいなものをグリフィスは持ってるんだろうな。
確信？何の？
すべてのさ。
However, not a lot happens to move the story forward. It's just a lot of dialogue and a lot of cute, funny moments with a handful of missions every so often. Things don't really get exciting until episode 6, which is the point where Zod appears. The fight between Guts and Zod is an interesting one because it sets a new standard for Guts to follow. The thing is, Zod is immortal, lives forever, and kills millions with his overwhelming ability and power. He has practically no weaknesses, and is so OP that nobody can win against him. However, he does have one weakness, which is that he's grown so bored and tired of fighting that life seems pointless. Zod stands at the top of the game, and because of this has been desperately waiting for an opponent worthy of his sword, and when Guts, a man so good at fighting he can't even be considered human, begins his fight with Zod, Zod feels he's finally found a warrior worthy of his sword. I feel like Zod and Guts have a lot in common, despite one being a monster and the other being a human, because both of them walk the earth without purpose before deciding to pledge their sword to Griffith. Of course, Zod doesn't do this until much later, but the point still stands. The fight between Guts and Zod feels so unique because of how unique an experience it is for both Zod and Guts. Guts is overwhelmed by an overpowered monster, and Zod is finally fighting someone who can withstand his blows. In fact, the only thing keeping the battle from ending is Zod's recognition of the Bailet and a warning to Guts of his impending doom. The fight with Zod is iconic, brutal, and exciting, and sets up an introduction for one of the best characters in the series. I like that Zod has a very humanistic ideal to his attitude despite his boredom. Later in the show, he ends up saving Guts by letting him borrow his sword for a brief battle, and I'd like to think of that as his thank you for giving him such a great fight. The thing about Berserk that's so unique is so much of the plot sets up a moment for later in the arc, but manages to do it while still remaining devoted to what's happening now. The way Berserk's story flows is flawless in both pacing and the systematic order it takes place in. It moves from point A to point B and jumps over every obstacle that keeps it from getting there without feeling too slow or too fast. Something that most series end up failing to do at a consistent pace. But with Berserk it manages to do it in all 25 episodes, hell, all 39 volumes of the manga. The plotline setting up the Eclipse technically starts at episode 6, but where the situation really starts to unfold would be episode 10, an episode where Griffith tells Guts that one of the men in the kingdom he is trying to appease is incredibly jealous of him and that he wants Guts to kill him for him. And Guts completely agrees to this mission. It's just a stealth assassination, right? Well, unfortunately, Guts learns that the man not only has a son, but is extremely hard on his son while training him, and upon eavesdropping, he often finds himself reminded of his childhood with Gambino. And after Guts finishes killing the man who plans to murder Griffith, he quickly kills someone, opening the door to see what's going on in fear of being caught, until he gets a closer look and finds out that it was the kid. However, it's a little too late as the kid is already mortally wounded and dying. This scene is emotionally harsh, because after Guts realizes the mistake he's made, he does the best possible thing he can for the kid at this moment and holds his hand, to give the kid closure and stability as he passes. It's sickening, and even kind of heartbreaking. Made worse when Guts runs and gets shot in his side and escapes out of the sewer, and he goes to report back to Griffith after having gone through actual fucking hell, and in this very moment, he comes back only to hear Griffith say,
私にとって友とは決して人の夢にすがったりはしない。誰にも強いられることなく、自分の生きる理由は自分で定め進んでゆくもの。
I think this scene hits a lot harder when you realize Guts killed a kid, got shot in the side, and crawled through a sewer for Griffith, only to overhear him saying he doesn't view him as his friend because he's not his equal. This is the first moment in the series where Griffith starts to be seen as less likable to the viewer, but also the main underlying reason that Guts wants to leave the Band of the Hawk to begin with, which brings me to the moment he actually does leave the Band of the Hawk. Now for this segment and forward in the series, the show starts to get kind of ambiguous and confusing. By that I mean from this point forward, a series of events take place, and most of it's really mindfucky and traumatic. I wouldn't say like end of Evangelion level, but it makes you ask a lot of questions as to what the significance of a lot of things really is. The last 7 episodes of Berserk invade your comfort zone in a very unforgiving way, and get worse and worse as it keeps going, until of course the final episode, which is really horrifying. Basically, after Guts leaves the Band of the Hawk, he goes into training with Gato for a year. However, he learns the hard way that during this year, the Band of the Hawk has gone through a bit of hell. This is because right after he left, Griffith made the stupid mistake of sneaking into the princess's room and fucking her into oblivion, and her servant had to go and watch through the keyhole. The Snoopy bitch. So because of this, the king imprisons Griffith and has a creep torture him for a solid year. This is all because of a one-night stand he had, due to how upset he was that Guts had left. Guts finds out about this and is overwhelmed with guilt, and decides to rejoin the Band of the Hawk to save Griffith. The crew breaks into the kingdom and saves Griffith, and gets out, but Griffith is so horribly broken that he can't even function. So in desperation, he uses the Beylet to sacrifice the Band of the Hawk to Hell, and in return becomes the 5th member of Godhand, who appeared in the Black Swordsman arc much earlier. Griffith lets terrifying monsters eat the entirety of the Band of the Hawk, leaving only Casca and Guts. Comes down, has his monsters hold Guts down, and forces him to watch as he rapes Casca. And then the anime just kind of ends, with the only continuation being a clip after the credits where Guts leaves Gato's house. The Eclipse of Berserk is a unique and iconic ending that also seems visually reminiscent of the horrifying clusterfuck that is the end of Evangelion. Which is actually pretty funny if you think about it, because this was before the end of Evangelion. The Eclipse of Berserk is genuinely fucked, but there's kind of a reason this is the case. This is an example of a Gainax ending done right for once, something most other series should take note of for sure. The ending of Berserk 1997 is not just horrifying because you're watching all your loved ones die, characters that you spent the last 23 episodes falling in love with and bonding with, but because from a newcomer's standpoint it just feels so out of place. Berserk did show monsters before this, but it never showed any depiction this hellish, and it certainly never showed such an out of place and weird area. The floor is made out of crying faces, giant gods coming down and talking about a festival. It's so weird, and your mind is scrambling to make sense of what the hell is going on, as the horrifying music takes its harsh and booming tone into a descent of madness. But the visuals are horrifying as well. Not only is everything so weird and unnatural, it's pitch black as far as the eye can see over a field of red faces, a field that seems endless, like it goes on forever, and the events that unfold become even more heart-wrenching. Guts is fighting the best he can against these monsters, but the rest of the Band of the Hawk are incapable of doing this. Corcus, for instance, swears he's in a never-ending nightmare, and when he sees a glimpse of something he desires, he becomes that monster's next meal. But you don't see him get eaten. You just see him in front of a monster, and the camera cuts away immediately. I think what's so heart-wrenching about Corcus's death is that nobody really cares, not even the fans. Corcus is a stuck-up asshole. He was the entire series, and nobody dared show concern for his death. Except for one person. The person he hates the most, Guts. In fact, Corcus is one of the few people Guts calls out for.
Corcus!
This subtle detail made me actually start to think and realize that Guts never really responded to Corcus with anything but understanding. He argued with Casca, but he never really argued with Corcus, even though Corcus constantly shat on everything he stood for, and I think part of the reason why is because he sees a lot of himself in Corcus. Corcus never liked him, not even when he gained the respect of everyone else, and I'm assuming that's because of the life that Guts took before he joined. Nobody really cared that Guts killed one of the members before joining. The group's so big that why would they? Corcus, however, never forgot about that, and never forgave him. Judo is brutally beaten to death trying to protect Casca, only to die with one of the most controversial statements before his death.
結構よく泣くよなお前ってさこれが最後のセリフか
And through this, a lot of people don't really know what to make of it. Nobody really knows what he says because it's been translated so many times, but my personal favorite version is the dubs version because it packs a lot of punch.
You cry a lot when you're alone, don't you, Casca?
Essentially, it's a very subtle way of letting you know that Judo loves Casca, but puts those feelings aside because he thinks she's better off with Guts. This was his attempt at telling her how he feels, but he dies unsatisfied with how he words it. I was crying like a fucking bitch when this happened. It hit me so fucking hard. And Pippin being subdued by a huge monster and ripped in half. Gaston's head blowing up just when Guts thought that he finally found someone alive. And the horrible ending as Guts is held down and forced to watch. As the very man he risked his all for, he gave everything for, rapes the woman he loves with cruel being. And he can't do anything about it. The way he ruthlessly tears through his arm, the way his eye is gouged out with no repercussion, his tears flowing down his face in anger and misery at his helplessness, made even worse by the fact that this horrible event will forever be the last thing his right eye will ever see. The ending is heartbreaking, unforgiving,
brutal, emotional, terrifying, and the best yet simultaneously worst way to end the arc. However, I think the ending of Berserk gets so much flack because it has a lot of things that are left completely out. Most of what's left out are plot setups for things in other arcs, namely the Skull Knight, who acts as a gateway for the Golden Age to end, and Salat, who makes his introduction very randomly. There's nothing to really critically analyze about these characters because they don't really shine in this arc, they're just setups for future arcs. However, there were two important details that got completely skipped over in the 1997 adaptation. One of which is an attempted rape scene where the king tries to molest his own daughter, and the other of which is an entire segment that takes place before the Eclipse with a villain known as Wild. I'm just gonna be frank with you, I don't like Wild. In fact, I'm actually glad he was left out of the anime, both animes. Wild is basically the embodiment of Berserk's take on nihilism, and very, very, very forced nihilism at that. The guy constantly treats women like objects, raping and pillaging, and he's so powerful that he feels like he owns the world. In his battle with Guts, I found it to be the most gratuitous moment in the series for an ironic reason. It just fills in the tropes of a typical Berserk arc and goes nowhere. But that's the point. It's not supposed to feel meaningful because it's about nihilism, at least that's what I've been told, which kind of sounds retarded, but you do you, buddy. Let's see. Rape. Check. Nameless characters we can kill off for no reason. Check. Big, ugly monster Guts can beat the shit out of. Check. Lots and lots of violence. Fucking check. It's a checklist of stupidity. There's not substance because there's no message. There's no tension because it feels so pointless. It's like Miura had an idea but didn't know where to put him, so he just kind of wedged him into the Golden Age arc because reasons. That being said, I want to address the king trying to rape his own daughter. I think the thing about this scene is that beforehand the king seemed like a pretty good man. He was always so kind to the main leads and filled with joy. He always seemed fair and hated the ridiculousness royalty put on having just a casual conversation. This attempted rape scene is an eye-opening because it plays into the theme of false idols, basically telling you that someone held at a praise standard can still be a piece of shit, which works into the series well with almost every single idol in the show. Vargas is a beloved priest who upholds the word of the Lord, but he tortures people for being poor. Griffith is the hero that saved Midland, but he also fed his entire crew to a bunch of monsters and raped the only girl in the group just because his boyfriend didn't love him anymore. The Count, the Snake Bear, and even the Queen are all proofs that idols are false and nothing more than just fucking assholes. Funnily enough, this is one of many details that the trilogy of movies tried to leave in. I think Griffith was very much so wrong in sacrificing everyone because he got everyone, including innocent Casca, involved in his personal beef with Guts. But I think the point that Femto did it is very valid. Who is in the right here? The answer is nobody. Berserk was never about having a good guy and a bad guy, and that's what makes it so compelling. A good guy wouldn't tell a child to kill herself or find a sick joy in torturing monsters. And a bad guy wouldn't save hundreds from an evil dictator, although conversely, a good guy wouldn't sacrifice his friends to hell and rape the only woman in the group, whereas a bad guy wouldn't save an entire town from the horrible sexual crimes of troll monsters. The point it's trying to make is that there is no good or bad in this world, and morals are something we set up ourselves. Everyone holds back their dark and sinister thoughts, but we've all thought something morally fucked up before. When Guts gets possessed by a demon, that moral shackle is shattered and he becomes the evil within himself before gaining control. Everyone is selfish in some way or another, it's just moral limitations that we put on ourselves that keep us from doing the most horrible things we can. I'm not saying everyone's a bad person in secret, I'm just saying that everyone is corrupt in some way, and it's a part of ourselves that becomes extremely horrifying to face. Because it's so alien and creepy to us, which puts weight on the question. In this world, is the destiny of mankind controlled by some transcendental entity or law? Is it like the hand of God hovering above? At least it's true, that man has no control, even over his own will.